The vast emptiness of space stretched out before the alien ships as they slowly approached the Earth. From afar, the planet looked peaceful, its blue oceans and white clouds a stark contrast to the cold, lifeless vacuum around it. Yet there was something strange, something that didn't sit right. It had been 500,000 years since humanity had disappeared from Earth, and the planet had remained untouched ever since. But now, for reasons no one could explain, a signal had been detected, one that was faint but undeniably real. The aliens, known as the Zorathians, were not unfamiliar with Earth. They had visited many times in the past, studying its strange human inhabitants from afar. The humans had been a curious species, constantly evolving, building cities, and expanding their reach into space. Yet, no one knew what had happened to them. It was as though they had vanished overnight, leaving behind nothing but ruins and unanswered questions. "Commander Zorak, we're approaching the planet," one of the alien officers said, his voice steady but laced with curiosity. Zorak, the leader of this expedition, nodded and glanced at the planet through the viewing screen of their ship. He couldn't help but feel a shiver of unease run through him. "Prepare the sensors," Zorak commanded. "I want to know exactly what's going on down there." The officers quickly began working, activating the ship's advanced scanning systems. As the ship hovered in orbit, the crew studied the planet closely. For the past few days, their sensors had detected a strange anomaly coming from Earth, a low-frequency signal, almost like a call, reaching out across the stars. It wasn't strong, but it was enough to catch their attention. And that was why they had come. "There's nothing," another officer said, his voice quiet but filled with confusion. "The planet's surface is quiet. No signs of life, no technology, nothing. Just ruins." Zorak's gaze narrowed. The humans had always been a resourceful species. How could they just disappear without a trace? It didn't make sense. Their cities were vast, their technology impressive. Something had to remain, something hidden. Zorak spoke again, his tone sharp. "Check the underground. There could be something we missed before." The crew immediately turned their attention to scanning beneath the surface of the planet. As the ship's sensors scanned deep into Earth's crust, they discovered something unexpected, something buried far beneath the surface, hidden from view for millennia. "Commander, we're getting strange readings from deep underground," an officer reported. "There's a large structure. It's huge, and it's still active." Zorak's heart skipped a beat. What kind of structure? The officer hesitated for a moment. "It appears to be some sort of military base, or a fleet. A war fleet, Commander." The words hit Zorak like a sudden storm. A war fleet. This was unexpected. Humanity had been known for its many conflicts, but Zorak had always assumed that after their disappearance, any remnants of their military forces would have been long forgotten, buried under centuries of decay. But now, there was something, still alive, deep within the Earth. "Activate full scans. I want to know everything about this fleet," Zorak ordered. The crew worked quickly, and the ship's sensors began to reveal more details. The fleet wasn't just a small group of ships, it was massive. There were hundreds of ships, scattered across an enormous underground hangar, each one perfectly preserved. Their designs were unlike anything the Zorathians had ever seen before, sleek and deadly, with sharp edges and strange symbols etched into their surfaces. Some ships appeared to be completely intact, as if ready to launch at a moment's notice. "Unbelievable," Zorak muttered, staring at the display in awe. "The humans, they built all of this, and they left it behind." The officer looked at Zorak, his eyes filled with uncertainty. It seems they were preparing for something. A war, or maybe something else. But why leave all of this? And where did they go? Zorak didn't have an answer. He was a commander, not a historian, but this was something even beyond his understanding. A war fleet hidden deep beneath Earth's surface, untouched for 500,000 years. It felt wrong. It felt as though this was not just a simple relic of the past. The fleet wasn't just dormant, it was waiting. Zorek's mind raced. Could the humans have known something? Had they built this fleet to protect themselves from an unknown enemy? Or was there a far greater purpose to all of this, something that had yet to reveal itself? "Commander, there's more," the officer said, interrupting Zorek's thoughts. "The fleet's systems are still running. Not at full power, but it's active. And there's a signal coming from the heart of the base." The hairs on the back of Zorek's neck stood up. A signal. What kind of signal? And why had it been waiting for so long? Zorek's voice was low and filled with anticipation. What kind of signal? The officer looked at his screen, his face pale. It's not just any signal. It's a distress signal. A call for help. Zorek's eyes widened. A distress signal. From a fleet that had been buried for 500,000 years. Who could have sent it? And why had it remained hidden for so long? Zorek stared out at the earth below. The planet was silent, but in the deep, forgotten corners of the world, something was waking up. And whatever it was about to change everything. The silence in the control room was deafening as Commander Zorek stared at the holographic display in front of him. The fleet beneath Earth's surface had remained hidden for 500,000 years, but now it was awake. A signal had been sent, and the mysterious war fleet had begun to stir. What was humanity preparing for all those years ago? And why had they left this enormous power buried for so long? Zorak didn't know the answers, but he was determined to find out. The Zorethian ships hovered just above the surface of Earth, the planet's ruined cities below them. The once great cities that humanity had built were now just ancient relics, overrun by the passage of time. Yet, Zorak had learned from his many years as a commander, nothing was ever truly as it seemed. There was always something beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. "Commander, we're ready to land," one of the officers said, breaking the silence. "We found the entrance to the underground base." Zorak nodded, feeling a deep sense of unease in his chest. He had always been confident in his decisions, but something about this mission felt different. It wasn't just curiosity driving him now. It was the feeling that this fleet, this hidden power, was connected to something far greater, something beyond their understanding. "Land near the entrance," Zorak ordered. "And stay alert. We don't know what we'll find down there." The Zorethian ships slowly descended toward the surface. The ground was covered in a thick layer of dust, as though no one had touched it in centuries. As they landed, the air was still and heavy, the silence almost suffocating. Zorak and his crew stepped out of their ship and onto the cracked earth below. The scene before them was one of stark beauty and eerie desolation. The remains of a city lay scattered in the distance, tall structures now reduced to skeletal frames. Nature had slowly reclaimed the land, vines growing through the broken windows of once proud buildings. The ruins were a ghost of what had once been, a world that had flourished, only to be abandoned and forgotten. "Commander, over here," one of the officers called, pointing to a large metal hatch embedded in the ground. It was partially covered in debris, but a faint glow could be seen around its edges. This was the entrance to the hidden base, the place where the war fleet had been buried for centuries. Zorek's eyes narrowed. There was something about this hatch that felt strange, almost like it had been waiting for them. He motioned for the team to approach and carefully remove the debris blocking the entrance. As the hatch opened with a low, groaning sound, a cool breeze rushed up from the depths below. It was a strange contrast to the warm, dusty air above. The Zorethians peered into the darkness, but their enhanced vision allowed them to see clearly. The tunnel that stretched before them was massive, wide enough to allow entire fleets to pass through. "Stay close," Zorak said, his voice steady but filled with an edge of uncertainty. "We don't know what we'll find down there." The group moved forward, their footsteps echoing through the tunnel as they descended. The walls were lined with strange symbols, none of which the Zorethians recognized. They were ancient, but the quality of the metal around them was unlike anything the aliens had ever encountered. It was strong, almost indestructible, and it seemed to pulse with energy. As they walked deeper into the base, they began to notice something that made their hearts race, a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath them. It was the sound of something powerful, something alive, waiting to be awakened. Eventually, they reached a large chamber, and Zorak's breath caught in his throat. The room was filled with ships, massive, sleek warships that looked both beautiful and terrifying. They were unlike any technology the Zorathians had ever seen. Each ship was perfectly preserved, as if time had no hold over them. Some were covered in strange, glowing symbols, and others seemed to have weapons designed for destruction, far beyond anything the Zorathians had in their own arsenal. Zorak's mind raced. How had the humans created such ships? And why had they hidden them here, beneath the surface of Earth? There was no sign of human life anywhere in the base. It was as if the humans had simply vanished, leaving their fleet behind, waiting for something. "Commander, these ships, they are still functional," an officer said, his voice trembling. "The power is still on. The systems, they're activating themselves." Zorak stepped forward, his eyes glued to the nearest ship. There was no mistaking it now. These were military vessels, and they were built for war. But the question lingered in his mind. Why? The aliens had thought Earth was abandoned, a dead world with no hope of revival. But now, in the heart of this ancient base, they were beginning to realize the truth. Earth wasn't as empty as it seemed. There was something waiting, something more powerful than they could ever have imagined. "What is this place?" Zorak muttered to himself. And what was humanity preparing for? Before anyone could answer, a deep mechanical voice suddenly echoed through the chamber, startling the crew. "Warning. Unauthorized activation detected." The room seemed to grow colder. The hum grew louder. Lights flickered, and one of the ships began to slowly power up, its systems coming online. The sound of machinery moving beneath the surface filled the room, and the aliens realized that they were no longer alone. Something was waking up. The crew stood frozen in awe, staring at the massive warships in the underground chamber. The air around them buzzed with the power that still flowed through the ships. It was as if these enormous machines had been waiting for something, waiting to wake up. Commander Zorak's mind raced. He had never seen anything like this before. The ships before him were so advanced, so perfectly designed, that they looked like they belonged to an entirely different galaxy, not Earth. The technology seemed far beyond the capabilities of any civilization he had ever encountered, including the Zorathians themselves. And yet, here it was, hidden deep beneath the surface of a planet that had been abandoned by its inhabitants long ago. "Are you seeing this?" One of Zorak's officers whispered in disbelief, his voice barely audible. Zorak nodded, his eyes scanning the vast chamber. The walls were lined with rows of ships, some large and others smaller, but all of them seemed to carry an air of deadly power. They were sleek and menacing, with dark, reflective surfaces that seemed to absorb the light. It was clear that these ships had been built for war. But who had built them? And why were they hidden so deep beneath the Earth's surface? What were the humans preparing for? Zorak muttered under his breath. "Commander, look here," another officer called, pointing to a nearby control panel that had been built into the ground. The panel was covered in dust, but as Zorak approached, it flickered to life with a faint glow. There were no buttons, no touchscreens, just a series of glowing symbols. Zorak knelt down, examining the symbols carefully. They looked ancient, and the language was unlike any the Zorathians had ever encountered. But the technology that powered the panel was unmistakable. It was alive. Even after all this time, it was still working. "Can we activate it?" Zorak asked. One of the technicians stepped forward, pulling out a small device from his pack. It was a translator, capable of understanding alien languages and scripts. He plugged it into the control panel, and a series of symbols began to shift and change on the screen. Minutes passed, and the room fell silent. The tension in the air was thick as the Zorathians waited for the device to crack the code. Then, with a low mechanical hum, the panel lit up, and a voice suddenly echoed through the room. It was deep, almost like a growl, and the words seemed to come from all directions. Initiating War Fleet Protocol. The voice was cold and emotionless. Zorek's heart skipped a beat. The ships, they were still connected to a command system, and it seemed like the protocol for launching them was still intact, even after all these years. War Fleet Protocol. One officer asked, confusion in his voice. Warning. Activation not authorized. Awaiting command input. The voice repeated. Zorek stood up, his mind racing. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The fleet was not just a relic of the past. It was active, and it was waiting for something. But what? Can you access the command codes? Zorek asked the technician. The technician worked quickly, his fingers flying over the translator. As the device scanned the symbols on the panel, new information began to appear on the screen. The words were strange, but the technician was able to translate some of them. The ships were designed for one purpose only, the technician said, his voice steady despite the shock. To defend Earth from an unknown enemy. Zorek's eyes narrowed. An unknown enemy. He had assumed that the humans had created these warships for some form of defense or conquest. But this was different. The fleet hadn't been built for war between nations. It had been built to protect Earth from something far more dangerous, something beyond their understanding. Who were the humans fighting? Zorek muttered. The technician continued to read, his expression growing more serious. It's unclear. The data, it's corrupted. But there are hints of a threat from the stars. The threat so great that humanity built this fleet as a last line of defense. They were preparing for something that had already come, something that would return. A cold chill ran down Zorek's spine. It was one thing to find an ancient fleet, but to discover that it had been built to protect Earth from an enemy that might still be out there. That was something else entirely. Awaiting command input. The voice from the panel repeated, its tone growing more insistent. Command input required to activate fleet systems. Zorek's eyes flicked to the ships before him. These machines had been built to protect Earth, but they had been dormant for 500,000 years. What would happen if they were awakened now? Would they still be able to defend the planet, or would they turn on the Zorethians? Zorek was torn. This fleet could be the key to understanding what had happened to Earth, and perhaps even to humanity's sudden disappearance. But what if they were unleashing something dangerous by activating it? Commander, we should proceed with caution, one of the officers said. We don't know what we're dealing with. These ships might not be friendly. Zorek's gaze remained fixed on the control panel. He could feel the weight of the decision before him. He could choose to ignore the fleet and leave Earth, but that would mean abandoning the mystery that could hold the answers to everything. Or he could activate the fleet and risk everything in the hope that the warships would still be able to protect the planet, as they were meant to. Activate the fleet, Zorek finally ordered. His voice was calm, but inside, his mind was racing. We need to know everything. The technician pressed a few more buttons, and the chamber suddenly filled with a low rumbling sound. The warship's engines began to hum, their systems coming online one by one. The ship's lights flickered, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. As Zorek looked up at the enormous fleet, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something far darker than they had imagined. Something that had been waiting for them for centuries. The ground beneath Commander Zorek's feet trembled as the ancient war fleet came to life. The low hum of the ship's engines reverberated through the chamber, growing steadily louder. For the first time in 500,000 years, the machines, designed for destruction, were fully awake. The air in the underground base was thick with tension, as if the fleet itself was aware of the momentous occasion. Zorek stood still, watching in awe as the ships began to power up. The lights along their sleek, metallic bodies flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The ships had been dormant for centuries, yet they were now alive again, pulsing with energy, ready to move, to fight. to protect. But what were they really waiting for? Was this merely the beginning of a new chapter, or was there something more hidden beneath the surface? "Commander," one of the officers said, his voice trembling, "the ships, they're coming online. Their systems, they're responding." Zorek's gaze remained fixed on the fleet. The large warships were now fully powered, their engines glowing with an intense, otherworldly light. It was clear that they were waiting for something. But what? What is it waiting for? Zorek muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. At that moment, the voice from the control panel spoke again, its deep mechanical tone echoing throughout the chamber. "War Fleet Protocol. Activation complete. Awaiting deployment instructions." The words were simple, but they sent a cold shiver down Zorek's spine. It was clear now. The fleet was ready to move, but it needed someone to give the command. "Deploy the fleet," Zorek ordered, his voice steady. "Let's see what it can do." For a moment, nothing happened. The lights of the ships flickered once more, and the hum of their engines grew louder. Then, with a sudden burst of power, the massive doors at the end of the chamber slowly began to open. The ships moved into position, their systems whirring to life as they glided forward, one by one. Each ship was magnificent, sleek and deadly, built for battle. They slowly took flight, emerging from the underground hangar and rising toward the surface. Zorek and his team followed, climbing into their own ship and preparing for what was to come. The Zorathians watched in awe as the fleet of ancient warships ascended, breaking through the surface of the earth. The ground shook again as the ships soared into the sky, their engines leaving a trail of energy in their wake. As the ships left the atmosphere, Zorek turned to his crew. "Prepare for anything. We don't know who or what we'll encounter." They had no idea what lay ahead. The fleet had been buried for 500,000 years, but it had been built with a singular purpose: to protect Earth from a threat that still loomed. But what could that threat be? Why had humanity felt the need to create such a powerful force to guard against something that might still exist? Zorek couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something far more terrifying than they could ever imagine. The ships flew higher, breaking through the clouds and entering the cold, silent void of space. Zorek's eyes scanned the stars ahead of them. They had already seen how advanced the fleet was, how it could turn the tides of any battle. But would it be enough to face whatever enemy had been so feared that this fleet had been built in the first place? The officer sitting next to Zorek spoke up. "Commander, we've detected something. Something huge." Zorek's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" The officer's eyes widened as he studied the readings. "It's not on any of our charts. It's an enormous ship, far beyond anything we've ever seen." Zorek felt a chill run down his spine. "Is it hostile?" The officer hesitated. "We don't know yet, Commander, but it's heading toward us. Fast." "Get ready for anything," Zorek ordered. "Activate the fleet's weapons systems." The alien warships formed a protective formation around Zorek's ship, their weapons primed and ready. The enormous, unknown ship loomed ahead in the distance, growing larger by the second. It was unlike anything the Zorathians had encountered. Its surface was smooth, almost like polished stone, and it shimmered with an eerie dark light. "We're about to make contact," one officer said, his voice tense. Zorek's mind raced as the ships closed in on the mysterious vessel. Whatever this enemy was, it was massive, and it was moving quickly. The weapons systems on the Zorathian ships locked into place, their targeting systems scanning the unknown ship. But the closer they got, the more Zorek realized that there was something unusual about this ship. It wasn't just an enemy ship. It was something ancient, just like the war fleet beneath Earth's surface. But its purpose was unclear. "Commander, I'm detecting a signal," another officer said. "It's a transmission. A message." "Open it," Zorek ordered. The alien officer pressed a few buttons, and a series of strange symbols appeared on the screen. Then, with a low crackle, a voice filled the communication channel. The voice was mechanical, distorted, and it sounded as if it had been traveling through space for thousands of years. Warning: fleet activation detected. Enemy engage. Prepare for immediate confrontation. Zorak's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a warning. This was a command, an order to engage. The ancient fleet was responding to a threat, and it had been waiting for this moment. The massive enemy ship, now only a few kilometers away, began to accelerate. Its weapon systems lit up, and a bright flash of energy shot from the ship toward the Zorathian fleet. "Braced for impact," Zorak shouted. The Zorathian ships opened fire, their weapons unleashing a barrage of energy blasts. The air around them seemed to crackle with power as the two fleets collided in a violent explosion of light and energy. Zorak gripped the controls of his ship, watching as the ancient warships engaged the enemy in a battle that would determine Earth's future. The battle had begun, and in that moment, Zorak realized that Earth's past was not as forgotten as they had once believed. The war had never truly ended. It had only been waiting for the day when the fleet would awaken again and defend the planet from the enemy that had once threatened it. But what would happen next? And who would emerge victorious from the battle that had been centuries in the making? The battle raged in the cold, empty expanse of space, and Commander Zorak could feel the weight of history bearing down on him. The Zorathian fleet, now fully awakened and primed for combat, fired relentlessly at the enormous enemy ship. Their energy weapons cut through the void with blinding intensity, but the massive vessel retaliated with equal force, its beams of light crashing into the Zorathian ships. Zorak's ship shook violently as an enemy shot hit its shields. Sparks flew from the control panel, and the warning lights flashed red. "Shields at 70%. The officer at the control panel shouted, trying to maintain control. "We can't take much more of this." "Keep them steady," Zorak barked. His voice remained calm, but his heart was racing. The enemy ship was unlike anything he had ever seen. It seemed to absorb the energy from the Zorathian blasts, almost as if it were alive. Each shot that hit it appeared to weaken the Zorathian fleet, but the enemy vessel remained almost unscathed. As Zorak studied the battle unfolding before him, he saw the Zorathian warships scattering, trying to avoid the enemy's blasts. The ancient fleet, so powerful and deadly, was now struggling against this unknown foe. The ships Zorak had awakened to defend Earth were now fighting for survival. "Commander, we need to find a way to disable its weapons," another officer called out, his voice tense. "We can't keep up this assault forever." Zorak's mind raced. The enemy was far more advanced than they had anticipated. Their weapons were devastating, and their defenses were nearly impenetrable. But there had to be a weakness. There always was. The Zorathians had learned to rely on their technology, but now, faced with this enemy, it seemed that their weapons and tactics weren't enough. Zorak glanced at the fleet's formation, and then at the strange, glowing symbols on the enemy ship. It was then that he realized something. "Wait," he muttered. "Look at the symbols. They're similar to the ones we saw in the underground base." One of the officers looked closer, squinting at the display. "You're right, Commander. It's almost like a pattern, but it's too complex. Could these symbols be a key to understanding the enemy ship's technology?" Zorak wondered aloud. "What if they're tied to how the ship operates? We need to decode them, and fast." "Commander, we don't have time," the officer said. "Our shields are failing, and the enemy is closing in." Zorak's mind raced. He knew they had to make a bold move. They had no choice but to take a risk. If they could find a way to outsmart the enemy, they could turn the tide of the battle. "Prepare to engage in a direct assault," Zorak ordered. "Target the weak points we identified in the hull. We need to hit them hard." The Zorathian ships adjusted their course, moving toward the enemy vessel at full speed. The battle was becoming a desperate struggle, with each ship fighting to stay in the air, dodging blasts from the enemy's devastating weaponry. Zorak watched as one of the Zorathian warships exploded in a fiery burst, debris scattering in every direction. His heart sank, But he couldn't afford to hesitate. The Zorathians had come this far. They couldn't back down now. "Commander, enemy vessel is launching smaller ships," an officer shouted, pointing at the radar screen. "They're deploying fighter craft. They're coming straight for us." Zorak's stomach turned as a swarm of smaller, sleek ships launched from the massive enemy vessel. They flew toward the Zorathian fleet at high speed, their weapons charging for an all-out attack. "Focus on the fighters first," Zorak ordered. "Protect the fleet and clear the skies." The Zorathian ships broke formation and began to engage the enemy fighters. The small vessels were quick, darting around like deadly wasps, but the Zorathians were skilled in combat. They fired in perfect synchronization, their weapons disintegrating the enemy fighters one by one. But with each enemy ship destroyed, more came, swarming the fleet. Zorak could see the battle spiraling into chaos. Despite the Zorathian fleet's advanced technology, they were being overwhelmed by the sheer number of enemies. Then the unthinkable happened. One of the enemy ships managed to break through the defenses and rammed into the hull of a Zorathian warship. The collision was catastrophic, sending shockwaves through the fleet. Zorak watched in horror as the Zorathian ship was torn apart, flames erupting from its core. The damage was critical, but there was no time to mourn the loss. Zorak's thoughts raced as the situation grew worse. The Zorathians had underestimated the enemy's power. But there was still hope. The ancient war fleet had secrets, and those secrets were their only chance. "Officer, can you access the fleet's core systems?" Zorak asked, his voice urgent. "There has to be something in the fleet's database that can help us understand this enemy better." The officer worked quickly, typing commands into the control panel. "I'm trying, Commander. It's encrypted, but I might be able to break through." Seconds felt like hours as the officer struggled to crack the code. The enemy ship was closing in, its massive cannons charging for another devastating blast. Then, with a sudden beep, the officer looked up. "Got it. The encryption's down. I'm in." The officer quickly scanned the data. "There's a weakness in the enemy's central core, an energy conduit that powers their weapons. If we target it, we might be able to disable their weapon systems." Zorak's heart raced. This was it. They had found the key to victory. "Lock onto the energy conduit and fire everything we've got," Zorak ordered. The Zorathian fleet focused all its firepower on the central core of the enemy ship. Beams of energy shot forward, striking the energy conduit with explosive force. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a massive explosion, the enemy vessel shuddered. Its weapons went dark, and the small ships that had been harassing the Zorathian fleet began to retreat. Zorak exhaled in relief. The enemy's main weapon had been disabled, but the battle was far from over. The Zorathians still had to deal with the remains of the enemy fleet. But Zorak knew one thing: they had won the first battle. And with the ancient fleet now under their command, they had the strength to continue fighting. As the enemy ships retreated, Zorak couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The war was far from over, and there was still much to learn about the enemy. But for the first time since arriving on Earth, he felt hopeful. They had awakened the ancient war fleet, and it had already proven its worth.